My idea, and people say, what would you do if you were the president? I get out the maps. Right? Get out the maps. I need it here because of this, this, and that. This is the old landing map that we want to replace with Ballard fencing. This is what we're going to do here. This is what we're going to do there. This is how many people we're going to hire.
You think that would help?
Yeah,
with Pelosi
absolutely.
And Schumer?
I think number one, think about this, and this is something that hasn't been reported. The president, in his budget request for 19, asked for $1.6 billion. That's what the Senate voted out of the Appropriations Committee, 22 to 5.
He's mad at Mick Mulvaney for that.
Right, so he's mad at him retrenching back to the old numbers.
Right.
And the bottom line is, what are you going to spend 5.8? That's been a moving target too. It was $5 billion, now it's 5.8. What are you going to spend it on? Tell me how you're going to deploy that money in a year and whether that makes sense.
Some parts of the wall are less immoral than other parts of the wall?
Well, we have border structures. We have fencing. We have Ballard fencing.
But there are people that don't want any fencing.
Well, I think that when you look at
Really?
When you look at, well,
what does immoral mean? If the fence is immoral, there's plenty of people saying it's immoral.
I think that the symbolic
You haven't
nature
seen people
and
call it
idea.
immoral?
No, I heard Nancy Pelosi call it immoral,
Okay.
but what I think she was referring to was the idea that a full-on wall of China style wall that's running through the whole thing is immoral, and I think that actually there's a lot of Americans that believe that, Joseph.
Think about this, Joe. You've got the Rio Grande meanders, right?
Right.
North, south, north, south. You're going to draw a line across the Rio Grande. You're not going to follow the Rio Grande. You're not going to put the wall in middle of the Rio Grande.
I don't think anyone.
So now the wall will be.
That is not where the right is.
So you're agreeing that there isn't.
I'm agreeing that border security, however you walls, steel, a combination of both. Other checkpoints, more agents, more.
Right now. See, you two could work this out right now.
No, I know,
and that. Show me the plan.
Not common ground.
The left not. They're not even coming to the table to talk about it.
Well, but come with maps, come with ideas, come with.
That won't work. They won't come with.
Well, how do you know it won't work?
I wish it would, but I mean, make it a.
All we see. I think my theory on government is make government boring again.
Heidi,
right?
you don't
actually talk about issues.
Both sides. You don't see this is a total political play right now. Maybe on both sides, but they aren't even going in with maps, much less. Let's hire more agents. Let's get more judges to consider people that are.
If you brought in Shelley Capito and John Tester, who actually serve as the chair of that subcommittee,
and look, we were talking about this. He's from Canada. Should there be a government shutdown over this issue? I think let's just put the basics on the table. Meaning the idea of shutting down the government over this issue unto itself. Makes no sense.
Shutting down all the other parts of government, whether it's USDA, whether it's Department of Interior, which just has dramatic effects.
Which I guess, I mean, you said bringing the maps, but as a former senator, how does this get resolved? Because he promised the wall. He won on the wall.
He also promised the Mexicans were going to pay for it.
So anyway, the Democrats seem to be no. Not a single dollar.
That is really unfair. If you take us back to the beginning of 18, when we voted on the DACA, when we voted on the DACA for the wall deal, a bunch of us voted for $25 billion for the wall. The president couldn't even get enough votes for his plan, which was the Grassley plan. So there has been an opportunity.
But now it's zero, Heidi.
But now we're coming into 2020, so now we have this elevated, ratcheted up.
So how does this
dialogue?
This is the longest shutdown in history. TSA is calling in sick. People, the national parks are closing. How do you think this gets resolved soon?
Well, I think it gets resolved the way Tim Kaine says it gets resolved, which is you have a number of people outside of leadership who start having a dialogue that is outside of that discussion. We did that in 13.
Does that force a vote, or does that just come up with a solution that then leadership will sign off on?
So let me tell you about 13. We did this in 13. Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, me, Amy. But we were up against the debt limit, which was really pushing a lot of the panic because of what could happen with treasuries on a balance sheet. And so we had kind of that deadline of the debt limit. We don't have that right now. But a number of us actually came to an agreement, then presented it to leadership, and it was the only deal they could take. And it opened up government. But right now you have a president who's saying, I refuse to sign anything but $5.8 billion for the wall.
Let's say he really did go to 2.5. Is it just out of the question at this point, and I think it is, for Schumer and Pelosi to say, okay, we'll do 2.5? But they will not do that because it would be somehow giving in to him, and it would be seen as losing face, and that puts us in a bad place.
But Joe, if you sit down with people and say, okay, can you agree that we want to replace the landing mat border
well, that
wall
makes
here?
sense, but I don't. You sound like you're from the other side, Heidi. They're not going to say yes to that.
They don't do that. What they do is they bring people in and say, my way or the highway. You've got to bring people in and watch the boring process of negotiation.
Ego is really high on both sides. Is there any chance that you're going to get these sides to back down? I guess a compromise that's reached and somebody comes up with and says, okay, how do you get all of the egos in that room to sign off on it?
Well, it's not egos as much as it is they now have hardened their base, and they've got to figure out a way to have that discussion.
They've boxed themselves or painted themselves into a corner with this.
Right, but there's one person who hasn't, and that's Mitch McConnell. And he could make the deal. But he has been burned once before at the end of the last Congress.
So you say if Republicans went in with maps and showing areas and said, and we're also going to, give some money to ICE and we'll get some judges so that we can consider all these cases more quickly. If you did a comprehensive bill, you think that Chuck and Nancy would say okay to $2.5 billion? I don't.
Well, I mean,
do you think they would?
I think
if it
that
was
presented with a plan that makes perfect sense, that explains why it is that you need new structures here. In fact, there's 22 miles of new border wall, which was authorized in the last appropriation.
But from the political standpoint on this, the president played into Pelosi and Schumer's hands in terms of saying, I'm going to take responsibility for it and do it. However, there is such a thing as overplaying your hand, even when you're dealt a good hand. I think as this government shutdown continues, both sides are going to be feeling the pressure on this. You can't not have a government running without somebody eventually saying, throw the bums out, all of them.
Yeah, Becky, the problem is they aren't in a negotiation. Yeah. And I think when the public has an opportunity to see what the fight is over.
When you think about the inflection points that could come, though, is it that Republican senators say, okay, we're going to break with the president, Mitch McConnell's going to break with the president? Is it that Schumer's going to wake up one morning and say, you know what, actually, I think we got to give in on this point, even maybe we'll call him a bully or something. I don't know. Come up with some. I mean, do you think that Trump is going to wake up some morning and figure out some new way to declare victory?
I thought Lindsey threw a lifeline.
Right.
With a temporary opening, which I jumped on and said, I think this is a great idea because it will take the heat off, lower the rhetoric. We'll move on to talk about Brexit, or we'll move on to talk about, the next challenge that we have in government, and it will lower the rhetoric on the wall, or what we call border security. And that didn't happen. So clearly, the president thinks that he's in the best position that he can be in right now. His answer is no. Nancy's answer is no. We've got to have people who can broker a deal between those two extremes.